Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian Mountains. Some of these stories will make you think twice before ever setting foot on Appalachian trails again. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, share this with your friends, and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks. Now let's get into it. It all started as this totally normal road trip. Me and my best friend Kenzie just decided we needed a break. Life had been nonstop. Work stress, relationship garbage, her apartment flooding twice. Just a long list of reasons to get away. We'd been best friends since middle school. Knew each other's secrets, phone passwords, family trauma. I helped her move 4 times and never once pretended to be sick. That's the level of friendship we're talking about. So we planned 5 days totally off-grid. No cities, no hotels, no crowds. Just us, some discount rental cabins we found on a sketchy-looking site, and the kind of silence you only get when your phone has 0 bars. We dropped pins in a shared Google Doc, loosely mapped out a route, starting in Asheville, then figured we'd just head north through the mountains and see what happened. The only real goal was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. Day 1 was basically perfect. We hit winding roads that looked like they were designed by someone who hated straight lines, windows down, sun flickering through leaves. Music turned up too loud, gas station snacks everywhere, and the kind of ridiculous laughter you only get from sleep deprivation and shared memories. We got lost a couple times, made a playlist we both swore we'd save forever, and by the time we pulled into our first stop, it already felt like one of those trips you tell stories about for years. The cabin was outside this little town called Draycott. You wouldn't know it unless you grew up nearby. We had to drive down a gravel path so narrow and dark it felt like entering a tunnel. Trees leaned over the road like they were listening. Kenzie made a joke about being swallowed whole. I laughed, but I kept both hands on the wheel. The cabin looked tired, like it wanted to fall over but hadn't quite decided when. Moss on the siding, porch slumped forward like it was too exhausted to stand upright. But the key was there, tucked in the lockbox, just like the host promised. Inside smelled like cedar and old towels, damp but not moldy, just lived in. We dropped our stuff, made noodles with our one pot, and ended up playing rummy on the wood floor until the cards slid out of our fingers. I remember sitting there thinking, this is the most relaxed I've felt in months, maybe years. Then at around 3 a.m. I woke up. No sound, no dream. Just that jolt of alertness, like something had snapped its fingers right next to my brain. The cabin was quiet, completely dark except for the little blue light from Kenzie's charging cable across the room. I got up, padded down the short hallway toward the bathroom. Everything creaked a little, but not in a scary way, just old wood noises. The mirror caught me before anything else. It wasn't cracked, it wasn't dirty, just wrong. The surface looked warped, like heat had melted part of it from behind, like it was about to drip. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of the reflection. That's when I saw it. Something behind me? Not clearly, just a shape. Tall, lean, bent slightly forward like it was trying to peek over my shoulder. It didn't look human, but not animal either. I turned so fast I bumped into the doorframe. Nothing, just the hallway. When I looked back at the mirror, nothing there. I didn't scream. Didn't wake Kenzie. I stood there breathing in shallow, slow gulps, staring at my own reflection and trying to convince myself it was just the mirror. Just old glass doing weird things with light. I told her the next morning that I didn't sleep well. That's all. I didn't say anything about what I saw. We drove north. The playlist got darker. Kenzie started playing a podcast about murder cases in national parks. Real comforting stuff. I stared out the window more than usual. The trees felt, I don't know, like they were watching us back. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror for no good reason, half expecting to see something crouched behind us in the back seat. Cabin 2 was smaller, but older. wood floors that groaned if you shifted your weight, crooked porch that faced nothing but endless trees, and a kitchen with cabinets that smelled faintly like rodent pee. There was a handwritten note on the counter that just said, "Don't go past the property line, terrain gets tricky." That was it. No smiley face, no explanation. That night, I woke up again. Around 1, I heard it before I even opened my eyes. Tapping, not random, not wind. 5 taps, evenly spaced, like fingers on a window pane. I sat up, held my breath. My bed faced the window that looked out on the back porch. I pulled the curtain just a little. It was there, at the tree line. Still, too still. Call again, head tilted sideways like its neck didn't have bones. Just watching. I blinked, it vanished. Then I heard Kenzie's voice from the other room. Just one word, "Letha?" I rushed in. She was sitting up, hair all messy, eyes wide. "You heard it too?" I asked. She nodded slowly. Outside my window, something was tapping. Neither of us went back to sleep. We sat in the living room with every single light on, backs to the walls, each of us watching a different direction. Around 5 in the morning, the lights cut out all at once. No flicker, no warning, just gone. We left at first light. No coffee, no breakfast, just got in the car and drove. Cabin 3 was way off grid. The listing used words like charming and secluded, but what it meant was no electricity, no plumbing, no signal, no help. Just one room, one fireplace, and 2 foam mattresses shoved against opposite walls. I wanted to bail. Kenzie said we'd already come this far. One more night, she kept saying. We started a fire, ate cold protein bars, and talked barely above a whisper. Not because we were scared exactly, more like we didn't want the woods to hear us. Around 9, we tried to sleep. I watched shadows crawl across the floor like they had a destination. Next thing I remember, I was on the floor. No blanket, no Kenzie. I sat up way too fast. My chest hurt, my lungs felt like they hadn't worked in a while. I stumbled outside, barefoot. There she was, standing right at the edge of the woods. She didn't move when I called her name. Didn't even turn. I took a few steps closer. "Kenzie, what are you doing?" She turned to face me. Her eyes were too wide, frozen. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, just mouthing my name over and over again. Then she turned and ran, straight into the woods. I followed without thinking. I know how dumb that sounds now, but in the moment it felt like the only thing to do. The forest swallowed her immediately. The trees grew too close together, like fences made out of bark. I could hear her voice, calling me, but it had changed. Still her words, but the tone was wrong, slowed down, deeper, like someone played a recording at the wrong speed. Then, nothing. Just this crushing silence that made my ears ring. I don't know how long I wandered before I found the cabin again. The sun was rising, my legs were shredded from thorns, my feet bled through the soles of my socks. The front door was wide open. She never came back. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station, filed a report. I only told them what I could say out loud without sounding like a lunatic. They took me seriously, sent drones, volunteers, dogs. Nothing. One of the older rangers called me into an office, shut the door, just him and me. "You drew something in your report," he said. "That shape you saw behind you." I nodded. He looked tired, said, "You're not the first to draw that. Not around here." They called it folklore. Maybe a trick of the light, a story locals tell tourists to creep them out. But I know what I saw. I haven't answered Kenzie's number since. I was 23 when I decided to drop off the map for a bit. Not forever, but I didn't set a return date either. Told my friends I was heading out for a solo hike in the Appalachians, like I'd done it a dozen times before. What I didn't say, what I didn't even fully admit to myself, was that I wasn't expecting to come back anytime soon. Or maybe at all. I'd just quit my job, walked away from a relationship that had become a 2-year dead thing we were both pretending to keep alive. Everything in my apartment looked like it belonged to someone else. So I left my key on the counter, grabbed a pack, and drove south. No goodbyes, just the hum of tires on the highway and a vague idea of where I'd get out and start walking. The plan was simple: hike into the Chattahoochee stretch, stick to the quieter trails, go light. I had 5 days worth of freeze-dried meals, a decent water filter, and a tent that was basically a glorified sandwich bag. My only luxury was an old leather journal I dug out from a box under my bed, something I hadn't touched since college. I told myself I'd write down whatever came to mind. Thoughts, sketches, maybe a few trail notes. Something to prove I'd been there. But I didn't write anything. Not a single word. The first 2 days were almost boring. I didn't see much. Just a deer that stared me down like I didn't belong there, and a couple of birds that went quiet when I looked up. That kind of silence sticks with you. No highway noise, no planes overhead, just this thick, pressing stillness and the occasional crunch of your own footstep. My phone lost signal by the first night, no surprise there. I turned it off to save battery, stuffed it in my pack, but even then, this is weird. It kept lighting up in my pocket, like a ghost notification or something. No sound, just the screen flickering on for a second, then fading. I figured maybe the battery was on its way out, so I turned it off for good and didn't look at it again. Day 3, I decided to veer off the marked path and look for a spot I'd seen mentioned on an old trail blog, a high shelf above a ravine. Supposedly flat, good airflow, totally secluded. Took way longer to find than I thought. The trees got thicker, almost unnaturally so. The deeper I went, the more it felt like daylight was fighting to get through the branches. When I finally found the clearing, it was almost evening. The sun was low, casting these long, razor-thin shadows through the trees. The spot was strange, perfectly circular, like someone had used machinery to cut it out, even though there wasn't a road within miles. Around the edges were blackened stumps, spaced almost evenly. It looked like a fire had rolled through ages ago and then just stopped. Something about the place felt wrong. The air didn't move, it didn't even smell like forest anymore. But I was tired, my legs were sore, and I didn't feel like backtracking to find a better site. So I pitched the tent and turned in early, hoping to reset my brain with some sleep. I woke up sometime after midnight to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't an animal, wasn't the wind. It was this low, deliberate scraping, metal on bark. 3 strokes, pause. 3 strokes, pause. Over and over. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe loud. Just lay there with my eyes open, staring at the thin layer of nylon above me. The sound was close, but not right outside the tent. Maybe 20, 30 feet out. Somewhere just past the tree line, too close for comfort. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't call out. I didn't even shift positions. I just listened. And then, without warning, it stopped. Not faded, just ended. Like someone had pressed pause. I didn't sleep after that. By morning, my body ached from staying curled up all night. I packed everything up faster than I ever had in my life. Didn't eat, didn't even bother brushing the dirt off my gear. I just wanted to move. I planned a shortcut, a barely marked trail that would eventually wind back toward the highway. A few minutes down the path, I saw it. Something was hanging from a low branch, a bundle of twigs, tied together with something pale and stretchy. Not rope, not string. It looked biological, like dried tendon or sinew. The shape was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. Not a symbol, not a figure, just bent wood that felt like it had been twisted while screaming. I couldn't stop staring at it. My mouth was dry, my stomach was starting to churn. I finally reached for my phone, half thinking I'd snap a photo, maybe use it as proof later that I hadn't just dreamt it. But the phone wouldn't turn on. Nothing. No battery icon, no buzz, just a dead black screen. I kept pressing the buttons harder and harder until I realized I was actually shaking. Then I noticed the silence, the kind of silence that's not just the absence of noise. It's the kind that makes you realize how much sound you take for granted. No birds, no bugs, no rustling leaves, just this vacuum that pressed against my ears. I started walking faster. My boots were loud on the trail, but even that felt dampened, like the trees were swallowing the sound before it could bounce back. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was tracking me. Not running, not chasing, just matching my steps, always out of sight. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Not campfire smoke. Something wet and chemical, like burnt plastic mixed with hair. It hit the back of my throat and made my eyes water. I picked up the pace. I kept telling myself not to run, that running would make it worse. But I was close. I could feel it. That's when I came around a bend and saw him. At first, I thought it was another hiker, someone tall, facing away from me, standing completely still in the middle of the trail. I called out, "Hey, you all right?" No response. No shift in posture, just frozen. I tried again. "Do you need help?" Then he moved, just a single twitch. Sharp, jerky, like a marionette with one string yanked. And he turned. I don't know how to explain what I saw. His face wasn't grotesque or bloody. It just didn't make sense. Like someone tried to sculpt a face out of clay and stopped halfway through. Eyes not aligned, skin pulled too tight in some places, loose in others, and where his mouth should have been, there was just this black slit. It opened and closed as he breathed, but made no sound. He didn't move toward me. Didn't say anything, just stood there, breathing through that awful split. I turned and ran. No plan, no trail, just crashing through the woods, branches tearing at my arms and legs. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs finally gave out and I hit the ground. When I looked back, the path was empty, but the forest wasn't the same. The silence was worse. It pressed in harder, and under it, I heard something steady, breathing, low and slow, keeping pace, just far enough that I couldn't see it. I didn't stop again, just kept moving until I saw the glint of metal through the trees. My car. When I reached it, I nearly collapsed. Threw my pack in, slammed the door, and just sat there, trying to steady my breath. Then I looked up. Something had been drawn into the layer of dust on my roof. Same shape as that twig bundle, the same warped, twisted form. I didn't touch it, didn't wipe it off, just started the engine and drove. No stops, not for food, not for gas until the tank was nearly dry. I passed towns, rest stops, diners, just kept going until daylight broke. Eventually I pulled into a rest area, checked my gear. The journal was still there, but every page was blank. I remember writing in it. I remember the pen dragging across the paper, recording shapes, smells, that scraping noise. I even remember underlining things, but the pages were clean, not just blank, untouched. I dropped it in a trash bin by the bathroom and walked away. My name's Elric. I set out to do the loop in 7 days. The full backcountry circuit through the southern Appalachians, starting at Coldwater Ridge in North Carolina, cutting through the Smokies, then curling back around to the state line. It was one of those trips I'd talked about doing for years but kept shelving for someday. Then one morning I just got in the car and went. No countdown, no goodbye texts, just me and a packed rucksack. When I shut the car door in the gravel trailhead lot, I didn't check my phone, didn't take a photo, didn't shoot off a message. I left it all in the glove box without really thinking about it. Or maybe I was thinking about it more than I wanted to admit. It felt like if I looked back, if I even paused for a second, something might call me on it, drag me home before I even started. That first day was easy. The air was crisp, trail was dry, and my boots still felt good. I passed 2 groups coming the opposite direction, One was a trio of retirees with walking poles and huge sun hats. The other was a pair of German guys who looked like they were trying out for some Nordic survival show. Poles, GoPros, matching vests. We nodded, traded a few smiles, and that was it. By the third day, I hadn't seen another person in over 24 hours. It didn't bother me. I liked it, honestly. I'd planned every detail. Weight balance pack, freeze-dried meals, backup filter, GPS beacon with a fresh battery. I even stashed a laminated paper map just in case. The whole point was control. No schedule, no noise, no texts or emails or small talk. Just the trail. That morning I woke up cold. Frost had spread over the inside of the tent like a thin film, and the air stung my nose when I sat up. I boiled water for coffee and watched the sun creep across a ridgeline. The whole valley started to glow bit by bit. I remember thinking, really thinking, that maybe I should stay out here longer. Not forever, but a couple more weeks. Maybe I didn't need to go back yet. I saw him that afternoon. I was rounding a bend on a mild incline when he appeared, maybe 20 or 30 feet ahead, just standing still in the middle of the trail. I slowed to a stop. He looked off. His clothes were torn. His left pant leg was ripped all the way from the thigh down, hanging in shreds. His leg underneath was caked in blood, with a long gash that looked raw and swollen. His face, God. Scratches across both cheeks and his forehead, like he'd fallen face first into a thorn bush. Blood crusted at the corners of his mouth. No backpack, no gear, no shoes. I stayed where I was and raised a hand. "You okay?" I asked, kept my voice calm, steady, like I wasn't mentally cataloging every possible escape route. He didn't answer. His eyes didn't even land on me. They just sort of swept past me like I was a tree or part of the trail. His lips were moving, fast, whispering something under his breath. Over and over. Couldn't make out the words. "Sir," I said, "do you need help?" He didn't look at me. Didn't blink. Just brushed past me like I wasn't there and kept limping down the trail. I turned to watch him go. Didn't move. Didn't follow. I stood frozen in place until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. No scream, no thud, nothing. Eventually I started walking again. By dusk, I reached a campsite near a narrow stream. Clear water, flat ground, lots of cover. Pretty much perfect. I set up, boiled water, dumped a pouch of beef stew into the pot and forced myself to eat, even though I felt like my stomach was closing up. I zipped into my bag and tried to sleep. I woke up to footsteps, not stomping, not animal rustling. Footsteps, deliberate, crunching through leaves, slow and spaced apart. Step, pause, step, pause. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. They stopped just outside the tent. My knife was in the mesh pocket above my head. I reached for it, slow. Every sound felt loud as hell inside that nylon bubble. Then I heard the steps again, this time circling the tent. One lap all the way around, then silence. No voice, no breathing, nothing. I don't remember sleeping, just lying there, blade in my hand, waiting for the zipper to move. At first light, I broke camp in under 10 minutes and got back on the trail without breakfast. My legs felt stiff, but adrenaline had already kicked in. An hour in, I saw the first sign. It was nailed to a birch, above eye level. Carved letters, hand done, uneven, chipped. Not safe past here. Turn back. No logo, no park seal. I stared at it for a while, trying to decide if it was a prank or some unofficial warning. I took a photo, just in case. 5 minutes later, another sign. Same words, same carving. Then a third one, half buried in the dirt off trail, tilted sideways like someone had thrown it. The trail changed after that. The trees got dense, the path narrower. Branches clawed at my pack and face. It felt darker, quieter. I had to duck and sidestep constantly. That's when I started hearing it, a whisper. At first I thought it was wind squeezing between trees, but then I heard words. She saw it. I froze. It again. Closer. Behind me. She saw it. I spun around. Nothing but trees. Nothing moved. I pulled out my GPS. No signal. Offline map still showed me on trail, but the surroundings didn't match anything I remembered. No blazes, no markers, just forest and that whisper dragging behind me. Then I saw it. The cabin. It wasn't visible until I was nearly on top of it, hidden in a low dip off the trail. Old wood, blackened, collapsing in spots, windows bare. Just holes. The door was cracked open. It looked like someone had been about to close it, then changed their mind. I told myself not to go closer. I actually said nope out loud, then took a step toward it anyway. Inside, the air smelled like rot, wet wood and something metallic, like blood. There was only one thing in the room, a wooden chair in the dead center, facing the door. It was raw, stripped of finish, with deep drag marks circling it like it had been pulled in every direction over and over again. I backed out, didn't turn around, just stepped backward and pulled the door shut with my fingertips, barely touching it. I walked for hours after that. Didn't stop, didn't eat, just walked until the forest started to feel less suffocating. The light changed, the trees spaced out a little. I found a fallen log and dropped behind it, curled against my pack, still holding the knife. That's when I heard it again, a voice, smooth and quiet, just behind the trees. I saw you at the cabin. I didn't move. You saw me. It kept circling, always 10 feet back, never stepping into view. Come see me again. No footsteps, no rustling, just the voice, always behind the trees. I ran. Branches clawed at my face, my arms. I didn't care. My legs burned. I bit down so hard on my tongue I tasted blood. And then, suddenly, firelight. A group of hikers around a fire, maybe 5 or 6 of them. College age, laughing, drinking, passing a bag of marshmallows. I staggered into the clearing, collapsed at the edge of their fire circle. They jumped up. One of them grabbed my shoulders and asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I just looked at the fire. I sat awake all night, back to a tree, watching the dark. I didn't hear the voice again. In the morning, I followed them down a different trail, one I didn't recognize. 2 hours later, we reached a ranger station near the bottom. They went inside, I stayed outside on the concrete steps. Eventually, a ranger came out and sat beside me. "You see anything unusual?" he asked. I didn't look at him, just said, "I went past the signs." I used to work trails for the Forest Service. Did that for most of my 20s. The job was a good fit for me, not because I was passionate about conservation or into the whole ranger lifestyle. I just liked the quiet. I liked moving through trees without having to make small talk. Most of what I did was maintenance, clearing brush, restocking first aid, repairing signage, sometimes hauling back tents and gear people abandoned when they panicked or got turned around. You wouldn't believe how often people walk into the woods like they're strolling through a mall and then disappear like smoke. That area is known for it. The ridge swallows things, people too, and most folks don't really grasp what that means until they've seen it happen. I did, more than once. My main post was about a mile outside Grayson Hollow. That's a blink and miss it kind of town. You go through it, not to it. The kind of place that feels like it exists only because someone forgot to shut it down. The forest around it was dense and mostly untouched. Some parts felt old in a way you can't quite explain, like they remembered things that you didn't. Locals called it the Cradle Gorge. I heard that name a dozen times, but I only ever heard it from old people, folks who lived there a long time and didn't talk much about the woods. You'd think it was just a nickname, something poetic, but no one in uniform joked about it, not after what happened in 2014. October 18, it was a Saturday. Dispatch radioed us just after 5:30 p.m. A man named Daniel Levins and his 9-year-old son, Mason, had set out for a 2-day loop hike. Standard route, Briar Cliff, through Devil's Spire, and back down. It's rugged but doable. They were supposed to check back in by noon. When that didn't happen and their Subaru was still parked at the trailhead, we got called out. I was teamed up with Shelton and Jules. Shelton had been on the job 12 years by then. Quiet, steady guy, didn't talk much, but you could tell he paid attention to everything. Jules was the new one, fresh out of training but sharp. She asked the right questions and knew how to keep her pace without wasting energy. Some people burn out fast on their first deep trek, but she moved like she'd been doing it since middle school. We didn't waste time, grabbed our packs, radios, med kits, and were on the trail before the sun dropped behind the ridge. At first, it was routine. That part of the forest has some nasty terrain, sharp drop-offs, tangled switchbacks, spots where a perfectly marked trail just seems to vanish under moss or a rock slide. We lose people every year. Usually it's just someone who didn't bring enough water or wandered a little too far off the loop. 90% make it out the next morning, with nothing worse than a bad blister or a bruised ego. But that night, something just didn't sit right. About 20 minutes in, I got that crawling feeling. Not fear exactly, more like friction. Like walking into a room after someone had a fight, and even if everything's quiet, the air's still charged. It was subtle, but it started early and it didn't go away. 40 minutes in, we found the jacket. It was Mason's, bright red. I remember thinking how out of place it looked just hanging there. It was draped over a branch, like someone had taken the time to fold it across instead of dropping it. Jules crouched beside it, running her fingers just above the fabric like she didn't want to touch it directly. "This wasn't dropped," she said quietly. "Someone put this here." She was right. No dirt, no tears, no dew. The thing was bone dry, like it had been placed just moments before we showed up. We logged the coordinates and kept going. About 20 minutes later, Shelton called it in. "CIA, you got a minute?" "Yeah." "What is it?" "I'm looking at something. Might be a structure. It's not man-made. I don't know what it is." That got my attention. Shelton doesn't speculate. I found him standing in a clearing barely 10 feet across. The trees around it leaned inward, almost like they were trying to hide what was inside. And in the center was this thing. It looked like a totem, but not in any way I recognized. Bark, feathers, woven twine, strips of leather or hide and bone, lots of bone. Not deer, not anything I could name. It was leaning forward at a weird angle, like it was reaching. It stood maybe chest high. I circled it slowly, not sure if I should get closer. "You ever seen anything like this?" Shelton asked, still frozen in place. "No. Do you want to touch it?" "Hell no." We flagged it on GPS and kept moving. I already knew that was a mistake. You don't find something like that unless something's guiding you toward it. Maybe 15 minutes later, Jules came through the radio. Her voice was different, tight. "I'm hearing something north of my position. Sounds like a voice. You sure it's not echo?" "I've been standing still for 5 minutes. Whatever it is, it's moving, and it's repeating something over and over. It's not English. I don't even think it's a real language." We tightened formation. I caught up with her first. She was crouched down, breathing through her nose. Eyes locked on the tree line, like it might blink. "There was something on the other side of that ridge," she whispered. I didn't see it, but it was close. I felt it. It stopped when I moved. That's when we decided to set up camp. Not because anyone said, "Let's rest." We were just too far in to double back before dark. And no one wanted to walk those woods alone after sundown. Even Shelton didn't argue. We built the fire small, just enough to give us a little light. None of us were really talking at that point, just listening. Around 2:30 IEM, something moved. I saw it first. It passed just beyond the edge of the firelight. Tall, narrow. Its limbs didn't swing right. Its shoulders didn't dip when it stepped. There was no crunch of leaves or snap of twigs. Jules saw it next, then Shelton. It circled once, slowly, like it was measuring us. Then it was gone. Jules leaned over and whispered, "Did you see its face?" I shook my head. She said it didn't have one. The next morning we found Mason. He was sitting in a grove. His back was straight, legs crossed, like he'd been placed that way, not slumped, not curled up. He was looking at us but not responding. His lips were moving but no sound came out, just this empty little whisper loop. We checked him. No bruises, no scratches, no signs of exposure. His clothes were clean. I don't mean passively clean, I mean laundry day clean, like he'd been changed into fresh clothes. When I touched his arm, it was freezing. We called for a medevac, but there was no way to land. Canopy was too tight. We'd have to carry him. He didn't fight, didn't react at all. Halfway back, he started humming. 3 notes, over and over, off key and way too slow, like a lullaby played backward. Jules clapped her hands over her ears. I nearly dropped him. Shelton muttered, "That's not a normal kid." I didn't argue. At base, the med team said, shock, severe trauma. But none of that explained the eyes. He never blinked, not once. His dad, never found, no gear, no tracks. It was like he'd stepped into thin air. The grove where we found Mason didn't exist on the maps. I went back once, same coordinates, just dense woods, no clearing. And the totem? Gone. I filed the report, resigned the next day. No one asked why. Jules transferred out a month later. Shelton moved up to Oregon. Now I work nights at a warehouse on the edge of town. I was 26 the summer I decided to solo hike a stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Not for some big spiritual awakening or to find myself or anything dramatic like that. I wasn't fresh out of a breakup or running from a dark past. I just needed to unplug. Too many texts, too many emails, way too much of everyone else's noise in my head. I figured if I couldn't hear them, maybe I could hear myself for once. I chose a section in Virginia, somewhere between this quiet little town called Leeville and the edge of the George Washington National Forest. Not the most remote place in the world, but it wasn't a tourist trap either. I wanted isolation, and this stretch promised just that. No cell signal, barely any foot traffic, long patches of nothing but trees. That sounded perfect. My gear was basic, but decent. Sturdy boots, new but not broken in enough. A cheap ultralight tent I bought secondhand. A bear bag, one of those crinkly silver emergency blankets. A knife clipped to my belt mostly for peace of mind. I had enough dehydrated meals to last me, plus a printed map and compass I barely knew how to use. I wasn't reckless, just optimistic. Figured 4 days alone in the woods would do me good. Hit the reset button. The first day went almost exactly how I hoped. I made good distance. The trail climbed ridgelines, dipped through hollows, all shaded in that kind of green that only exists deep in forests like that. Dark, almost damp looking, like it soaked into the bark. It was quiet, but not empty. Chipmunks darted across the path, and I caught the sharp taps of a woodpecker now and then. I didn't see anyone else, just me and the trees. I actually smiled at one point for no reason. I pitched my tent that night on a mossy rise maybe 30 yards off trail. The ground was soft and dry. I hung my food properly, crawled into my bag, and listened to the creaks and pops of the forest settling in for the night. It wasn't scary, just quiet. I thought it was kind of beautiful. The second day started early. My back ached a little from the ground, but I felt good, energized. I only saw 2 people that morning. Both older guys headed the other way, probably finishing up their own trip. We nodded, but didn't really talk. By afternoon, I was far enough out that the woods felt thicker, less maintained. I found a flat spot near a fallen tree and made camp again. That evening was uneventful. I boiled water for one of those meal pouches, something like beef stroganoff that tasted like salt and regret. Still, I was hungry enough not to care. I watched the fire until the light faded completely, then doused it, zipped into the tent, and closed my eyes. I woke up sometime after midnight. It wasn't a noise that woke me, not really. It felt more like my brain flipped on all at once. like my body had sensed something before my mind caught up. I was just suddenly awake. Not groggy, not confused, just alert. I didn't hear anything at first. No wind, no crickets. The silence was thick. I remember that specifically. The silence had weight. Then I heard it. A laugh. Short, quick, like someone trying not to laugh too loud and failing. It echoed weirdly, bouncing between the trees in a way that made it impossible to tell where it came from. It wasn't close, but it didn't feel far enough. Then, nothing. Just that crushing silence again. I lay there stiff, eyes wide in the dark, ears straining for any follow-up. Nothing came. My hand found the knife at my side and stayed there for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep again, not even for a second. When morning finally came, I didn't waste time. I shoved everything into my pack, skipped breakfast, and hit the trail fast. Every little sound made my stomach clench, twigs cracking, leaves rustling. I kept looking over my shoulder even though I knew how stupid that felt. The trail wound through some tighter spots that day, places where the forest almost folded in on itself. Overhangs of rock, switchbacks that felt like blind corners. I kept my eyes moving. Every branch felt like it could be hiding something. Every shadow seemed just a little too still. That night, I didn't stay near the trail. I went deep into the trees. I must have bushwhacked a quarter mile before I found a hollow between two dead stumps and set up there. No line of sight to the trail. That was the point. I figured if someone was messing around out here, I'd be invisible to them. I tried to sleep. My body was screaming for rest. Legs tight, feet raw, shoulders aching. But my mind wouldn't cooperate. I just lay there, listening to the forest. And then, again, it hit. Snap awake. No sound, no warning, until there was. Whispers, low, just outside the tent. Not one voice, several, definitely people. Too quiet to understand, but no way it was the wind. I didn't move, barely breathed. The tone was strange, not conversation. It had rhythm, like a chant almost. Not in English, not in any language I recognized. It looped, like a lullaby being hummed by someone who'd never heard a real one. My knife was under my backpack. I reached for it inch by inch, arm trembling. Then footsteps, circling the tent. Not heavy, soft, deliberate, each step slow enough to count. And then the zipper, not being opened, just touched. Fingers brushing along it like someone testing the texture. The sound of skin on nylon. That soft hiss. The whispers stopped. Everything stopped. I sat frozen, knife in hand, pulse crashing in my ears. My back was locked straight, every muscle tight like it might snap. I stayed like that for an hour. Maybe more, I don't know. Eventually, I realized the sounds were gone. Nothing but the normal quiet again. At sunrise, I was packed and gone in minutes. I didn't eat, didn't check the map. I just moved. My legs were dead, but adrenaline pushed me. Then I saw the carvings. First one was just a deep gash in a tree, but then another, and another. They weren't natural. Symbols, circles with lines through them, triangles stacked, sharp hooks, deep, clean cuts like someone took their time. And they kept appearing. Every few minutes another one, fresh, bark still curling at the edges. That's when I saw him, on a slope, maybe 30-35 yards off, standing still, shirtless, skin so pale it looked gray, hair long and matted, just watching, not hiding, not blinking, just standing there. I didn't stop, didn't look twice, just kept moving like if I paused, I'd freeze up completely. I didn't camp that night. I kept going until my body quit, found a rock outcrop and collapsed next to it. No fire, no food, just my back to the stone and my eyes locked on the dark ahead. Around 2 a.m., I saw it again, firelight. Far off, past a ridge, not one flame. Bigger, flickering like a dozen torches moving together. The glow pulsed, unsteady. I heard voices, chanting, louder now, like a crowd, rhythmic, practiced. I grabbed my pack and left. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention. I just moved, fast, quiet, through brush and branches. Slipped twice, cut my arm on something sharp, blood ran down into my palm. I didn't stop. At some point, the trail vanished, or I wandered off it, I don't know, I didn't care. I just kept going until I hit pavement, old, cracked, covered in weeds and broken branches. No signs, no lines, but it was something human. I followed it. Maybe 2 miles later, a truck came around a bend. Beat-up blue pickup, ladder strapped in back. I stepped into the road, waving both arms like a lunatic. The guy slowed. Window down. You all right? I didn't even answer the question. Can I get a ride? He looked me over. Get in. We didn't talk much. He said I looked torn up. I just nodded. A couple of years ago, I went off-grid for a solo hiking trip through the eastern Tennessee section of the Appalachian Mountains. It was early fall, one of those in-between weeks when the leaves were starting to crisp but hadn't fully turned. I'd just ended a relationship that had dragged on for 4 years. Ending it wasn't messy, just empty. I needed quiet. I needed not to be around anyone who could ask me how I was doing. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even roughly. That was intentional. No GPS, no phone signal, just a couple of paper maps I'd marked up myself, a compass, a decent pack, and about 6 days worth of food. I know, not the best decision if you want someone to find your body. But I wasn't really thinking in those terms back then. This wasn't my first time soloing. I'd done some shorter treks on my own before. The basics don't change. Stay on marked trails when you can, check your bearings constantly, and don't push past your limit. I'd found this lesser-used feeder trail that broke off from the main Appalachian Trail. It was old, barely maintained, and didn't appear on every map. That was part of why I picked it. It felt private. I'd traced out the path by hand, cross-referencing a few topo maps and old forum posts from hikers. Marked a few good spots for camping. Most of the route wasn't technically dangerous, just remote and overgrown. And I liked that. I liked the sense of being alone with the trees and whatever noises the forest made. By the third night, I'd gotten into a groove. Walk until the sun dropped low, find a spot near water, pitch the tent, eat something freeze-dried, fall asleep early. No signs of other people. No tire tracks, no boot prints, just the occasional animal sound. Birds, squirrels, maybe a deer if I was lucky. It was the kind of quiet I'd been craving for months. On the 4th morning, while I was packing up camp, I spotted something strange. There was a narrow trail heading down a slope just behind where I'd slept. Not an actual trail, really. More like a faint path, covered in leaf litter and brush. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. My first thought was deer trail, but it angled too sharply down to be easy for animals. I stood there for a while trying to decide. Then I thought, screw it. I wasn't in a rush. Might as well see where it went. The slope was steep, steeper than I liked, honestly. I had to keep a hand on the trees to brace myself. But when I got to the bottom, I stepped into this clearing I hadn't seen on any map. It wasn't big, maybe 50 feet across, but the ground was covered in these dark, flat stones. A few were stacked, others laid out in broken rows, all of them scorched. Like 100 campfires had been lit here, one after the other over years. I started walking the perimeter. Some of the stones had carvings, grooves, and lines that had been mostly worn down by weather. Nothing I could read, just weird, almost pattern-like scratches. It didn't feel like a campsite. Not one used by hikers anyway. No logs for sitting, no fire ring, no garbage, no footprints. I didn't touch anything. After a few minutes, I turned around and climbed back up the hill. Before I left, I pulled out my pencil and made a small X on my map. Wrote stone clearing next to it, just for my own records. That night, I made camp on higher ground. I ate, zipped into my bag, and passed out. Then I woke up. It was maybe 2 in the morning. and everything was silent. Not just quiet, dead silent. No bugs, no wind, no distant rustling. It felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then the tent shifted, barely, just a little twitch, like something nudged it from the outside. I waited to hear wind, but the air was still. No breeze, no flapping. I wasn't even sure I'd heard it at first, but I knew, I felt it. That subtle pressure, the sense that something was standing nearby, not moving, not breathing, just there. I didn't move. I lay completely still, my hand gripping the knife I kept beside my bag. After maybe 10 minutes, whatever it was moved on. I don't know how I knew, the feeling just eased. I never heard footsteps. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I felt off, like something had shifted. And my compass? It was useless. It pointed west. Constantly, no matter which way I turned, it just spun itself back to west. I tapped it, held it away from my gear, still west. Figured maybe the iron in the rocks was messing with it. Not great, but manageable. I decided to keep moving and try to triangulate my position using landmarks. Then I found a creek. It wasn't on any map I had, and it was flowing east, completely opposite of what it should have been doing. I followed it for over an hour, thinking maybe I'd run into something familiar, a ridge, a rock face, anything. But I ended up back in the same clearing. At first, I didn't recognize it. I thought maybe it was a second one. But then I saw the same cracked stones, the same scorched patches, and this time there was something new. At the far end, someone had built a small structure, like a lean-to, made of branches and tied with what looked like old twine. Inside, strung across a horizontal pole, was a strip of cloth, stained dark in the middle, like someone had soaked it in something thick and let it drip out. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone having walked there, nothing moved. The thing just sat there like it had been placed for me. I turned and left, fast, too fast. Almost rolled my ankle on a rock. I didn't care. That night, I didn't set up camp. I walked until my legs gave out, then curled under an outcrop and wrapped my jacket tight. Kept my knife in my hand the entire time. Didn't sleep. Didn't even try. Then sometime deep in the night, I heard breathing. Not mine, and not any animal I know. It was wet and slow. Long, shaky inhales, like someone trying to be quiet but not quite pulling it off. It came from above me, up on the ridge. I held still, didn't blink, just waited. I must have blacked out eventually. When I woke up, my map was gone. I tore through my pack, checked every pocket. Nothing. My compass was still there, but the needle spun in lazy circles like it was dizzy. I picked a direction and walked. The forest changed as I went. The trees got taller, smoother. No underbrush, no birds. Just long, pale roots crawling along the ground. I passed a tree with claw marks. 3 deep gouges higher than I could reach. Higher than any bear could reach. Then I started hearing voices, not talking, just noises, low moans, humming, gurgles, the kinds of sounds someone makes when they're trying to use their mouth but haven't spoken in years. They were behind me. I'd turn, nothing. Turn again, and they'd be just out of sight. Always moving, always watching. That night I ended up back in the clearing. I didn't even realize it until I stepped in and felt the air change. It got thin, cold in my chest. There was a fresh fire in the center, coals still glowing, no flames, just heat rising off the stones. And on one of them, laid out neatly, was my map. I didn't stop after that. I didn't care where I was. I just walked, all day, through brush, across stream beds, up and down ridges, until I thought my lungs would give out. Then I saw someone, a man standing in the trail wearing a hunter's vest, sipping from a thermos. He stared at me like I'd crawled out of the ground. "Where the hell did you come from?" he asked. I just stared at him. He led me to his truck, handed me a bottle of water, and let me sit on the tailgate while I tried to catch my breath. Said he'd hunted those woods for 20 years, Never seen anyone this far in. I asked him about the stone clearing. He didn't answer, just looked straight ahead, knuckles tightening on the wheel. Finally, he said, "Don't go back in there." Back then, I was doing seasonal trail maintenance out in the Smoky Ridge section of western North Carolina. It wasn't exactly glamorous work, but it suited me. I wasn't a full park ranger, more like a contractor with a chainsaw, a clipboard, and a tendency to avoid small talk. Most days I was out there by myself, clearing down trees, repairing footbridges that got smashed up during storms, and hauling out the junk people left behind. I liked the quiet. It was simple. When you were alone in the woods, you knew where you stood. Either you were fine or you weren't. Nothing in between. They put me up in an old forestry cabin about 3 miles up a switchback called Moss Run. It was one of those places that looked like it had been nailed together in a weekend by somebody's uncle. Cedar planks gone gray with age, a tin roof that clattered whenever the wind picked up, a porch with boards that flexed when you stepped on them. No cell service worth mentioning, unless you stood on a stump out by the shed and held your phone over your head like an idiot. It didn't bother me. Most nights, I'd sit out there in a creaky camp chair, drinking instant coffee and listening to the trees creak. It felt like a place you could vanish for a while without anyone noticing. It was mid-June, and I was about 3 weeks into my rotation when my supervisor, Gary, flagged me down after morning check-in. He was a tall guy with a sunburned neck and a habit of drumming his fingers when he was thinking. That morning, he looked like he hadn't slept much. He unfolded this battered topo map on the hood of his truck and pointed at a thin spur trail branching off the ridge past mile marker 67. I'd never paid it much attention. Folks around there called it the Widow's Hollow. Not a name that exactly inspires warm, fuzzy feelings. Gary told me it had been unofficially closed off years before. The official line was erosion and unstable ground, but he said hikers still found their way onto it sometimes. Thinking it was a shortcut back to the main trail, my task was straightforward: hike the length of the spur, mark any hazards, and decide whether we needed to shut it down permanently. I remember him looking at me a little too long, like he was about to say something else, but he didn't. Just tapped the map again, folded it up, and handed it over. I set out around 9 with a light pack: radio, first aid kit, laminated map, 2 bottles of water, notepad, and a sandwich I'd regretted making with stale bread. The first stretch was nothing special. Overgrown brush that clawed at my legs, blackberry brambles that left little scratches across my knuckles. The path itself was barely more than a shallow groove in the undergrowth, just visible if you knew what to look for. Every so often, I'd spot an old trail blaze painted on a tree, faded to almost nothing. Maybe half a mile in, the smell shifted. It was this thick, sweet, stale reek, like a compost pile left too long in the rain. I stopped, took a breath, and felt my stomach tighten. I'd spent enough time in the woods to know the smell of something dead, but this was different. Not just rot, almost chemical. I tried to tell myself it was probably a decaying stump or some animal carcass. Nothing worth getting worked up over. Still, I pulled a bandana out of my pocket and tied it over my nose, just to take the edge off. I kept moving, and a few minutes later I spotted a pair of broken trail markers half buried in leaves, pointing in opposite directions. Like someone had yanked them out and tossed them aside in a hurry. I crouched to get a closer look, brushing away the leaves with my gloved hand. That's when I saw the footprints. There were dozens of them, all different sizes, pressed deep into the damp soil. Bare feet. Some of the impressions were small enough to be children's, but others were narrow and long in a way that made my scalp prickle. They looked wrong somehow. I tried to picture a group of hikers out here barefoot, and it didn't add up. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I unhooked the radio from my pack strap. "Base, this is Kalen," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I'm on the Widow's Hollow spur. I've got unusual foot traffic. Multiple barefoot prints, possibly transients. Nothing but static." I waited a few seconds, tried again. Still nothing. I knew the valleys were notorious for killing reception, but I didn't like the timing. I made a note in my pad, took a couple quick photos, and kept going. My throat felt tight, like I was breathing through gauze. About 20 minutes later, the trail dipped into this shallow hollow choked with rhododendron. The branches closed overhead so thick that it turned the daylight into a greenish gloom. I was stepping over a half-rotten log when I heard it. 3 clicks, sharp, deliberate, like someone tapping a fingernail on a hollow branch. I froze mid-step. The clicks stopped. I held perfectly still, 1 foot balanced on the log, listening so hard my ears ached. Nothing moved. No bird song, no insect noise, not even the wind. Just the slow pound of my heartbeat in my neck. I shifted my weight, feeling the log creak under my boot, and eased my hand down to my belt knife. My fingers were stiff. I thumbed the strap loose. I stepped off the trail and crouched low, peering between the tangled rhododendron. About 10 yards away, an old metal canteen hung from a branch on a piece of frayed paracord. It swung gently back and forth, like someone had let it go only moments before. Beneath it was a blue backpack, half unzipped, dark with damp. I crept closer, watching every shadow. My hand kept brushing the knife handle, like I needed to check it was still there. When I reached the pack, I used the blade tip to flip the top open. Inside were empty protein bar wrappers, a folded map, and a little spiral notebook. The first page had a name and date in wobbly block letters. Jonathan R. Wells, March 8th, 3 months old. I thumbed through a few more pages. Most of it was boring, notes about mileage, landmarks, weather. But the last entry made my scalp tighten. Heard them again last night, under the hill. Don't go further. A twig cracked behind me. I whipped around, knife up. Nothing, just the same trees and shadows. My breath felt too loud, coming in fast little gulps. I tried to slow it down, but my chest wouldn't unclench. Then the clicks came again, closer. Just behind me, hidden by the brush, I straightened up, turning in a slow circle, scanning every inch of undergrowth. My voice sounded too thin in my own ears when I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. It felt like the air was pressing down on me, thick and heavy. I almost left right then. Every part of me was screaming to get out. But the practical part of my brain, the part that still thought this was a job, kept insisting I needed to document everything first. So I did. I took photos of the footprints, the canteen, the backpack. But as I lifted the camera again, the smell hit me even stronger, sweet and rotting. I looked up the slope. That's when I saw him. A man stood about 40 yards uphill, half hidden behind a crooked oak. He was barefoot, skin pale as driftwood, wearing a faded gray shirt that hung off him like wet paper. He didn't move, didn't flinch when I called out. "Hey!" My voice cracked. "Do you need help?" He didn't answer. He didn't even blink, just stared, or maybe didn't. I couldn't see his eyes clearly. Then, so slowly it almost didn't register, he slipped behind the tree and vanished. I started moving before I even knew I'd decided, jogging up the slope, heart hammering. When I reached the oak, there was nobody there, but carved deep into the bark were 4 words, gouged, ragged, and crooked. "Stay off the roots." I looked down. The ground was laced with huge knotted roots, bulging up from the soil like something alive. The smell made my throat close. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the camera. Then the clicks came again, right behind me. I ran. Branches slapped my arms. Thorns snagged my sleeves and scratched my face. I didn't look back. I just kept moving, legs burning, chest so tight I could barely breathe. I broke into a patch of bright sunlight near the ridge trail and almost sobbed with relief. I followed the ridge another half-mile until I reached the maintenance road. One of the forestry trucks was parked under a leaning pine. I climbed in, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were still trembling when I grabbed the dash radio. "Base," I croaked, voice shaking. "Trail compromised. Returning." The dispatcher's voice crackled. asking me to repeat. I didn't. I turned the key, backed out, and drove straight down the mountain road. When I reached the depot, I left the truck running. I didn't even bother unloading my gear. I just walked the last mile to my cabin on legs that felt like rubber bands. I locked the door and sat on the floor with my back to the wall, clutching that notebook in both hands. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every creak of the boards sounded like footsteps. Every groan of the tin roof sounded like that clicking. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got up, carried the notebook out behind the cabin, and burned it in the fire pit. I stood there watching the pages blacken and curl, and I kept waiting for the feeling to lift, for the tightness in my chest to ease. It didn't. A month later, they bulldozed the trailhead and put up a metal sign, "Area closed, unstable ground." No mention of anything else. I never told Gary the whole story, never told anyone. I was 22 when I agreed to help my cousin clear out the old family cabin tucked up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It had been sitting there empty for almost a decade after my great-uncle died in it. Nobody in my family liked to explain exactly what happened. They'd just say he wasn't well, and that when somebody finally thought to check on him, they found him sitting at the kitchen table with his eyes stretched wide, staring at nothing in particular. I hadn't set foot up there since I was a kid. The only things I really remembered were the way the mountains seemed to fold in around the cabin and how the trees were so thick overhead you couldn't tell where the sky started. My cousin Ezra was the one who kept bringing it up. He acted like it was about salvaging anything worth money, but I could tell he was just too curious for his own good. He wanted to know why everyone treated the place like it didn't exist. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. The road twisted higher and higher until my phone lost service and the GPS map turned into a blank grid. The gravel driveway was nearly swallowed by weeds and brambles. The second I stepped out of the truck, I felt this odd tightness in my chest, like I'd already made a mistake but couldn't say how. Ezra didn't seem to notice anything off. He was busy yanking boxes out of the truck bed, acting like we were just doing yard work. The front door stuck halfway open, and Ezra had to lean his shoulder into it. When it finally gave, it made this low groan that set my teeth on edge. Inside, everything smelled old. Not exactly rotten, just stale and sour, like the place had been sealed up too long. Dust coated every surface. There was still a dented metal percolator on the stove. I remember thinking it was strange that nobody had bothered to clear it out after my uncle died, like they all decided at once it was better to pretend the place wasn't there. That first night, we tried to pretend it was nothing. Ezra got a fire going in the big brick hearth, and we dragged in a couple of crates to sit on. We passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey and talked about everything we could think of that didn't have anything to do with the cabin. Work, college, which aunts were the worst. For a little while, it actually worked. It felt like we were just camping out in a rundown house, like we could laugh off the feeling that something was waiting for us to turn off the lights. The cabin had 2 small bedrooms upstairs. Mine still smelled like mothballs and something sour that clung to the curtains. The floorboards were warped near the closet, so if you stepped wrong, they let out this muffled creak that sounded almost like a voice. I left the door cracked because the hinges shrieked if you moved them more than an inch. I don't know what time it was when the tapping woke me. It was soft, like the tip of a fingernail brushing against wood. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping it was just a branch scraping the roof. But it came again, a little faster this time, almost like someone was trying to get my attention without making a real noise. My eyes adjusted enough that I could see the outline of the doorway. There was something there. Half a face leaned into the gap, skin so pale it looked almost gray in the dark. The mouth hung slack, like it was about to say something but forgot how. "Ezra?" My voice cracked in the middle. The face slid back into the hallway without a sound. I lay there, heart slamming against my ribs. My hands were so cold I could barely feel them. When nothing else moved, I finally pushed the blankets aside and crossed the hall. Ezra opened his door on the second knock. His hair stuck up in all directions and he blinked at me, squinting like the light hurt. "You were at my door," I whispered. He rubbed the heel of his hand over his face. "I wasn't. I've been asleep." I didn't go back to my room right away. I sat on the floor next to his bed for almost an hour, staring at the crack under the door. Ezra didn't tell me to leave, but eventually he sighed and muttered, "It was a dream, Rowan. Just a dream." But I couldn't make myself believe that. The next morning, we tried to smother the memory under busy work. Ezra dug through boxes like he was looking for something specific, though he wouldn't say what. Most of it was junk. Old newspapers turned brittle and yellow, water-stained letters with handwriting none of us recognized, a stack of black and white photos, most too faded to see clearly. One of them stuck with me. My great-uncle was standing up on the ridge behind the cabin. His face was empty. Not sad, not angry, just blank. But his head was tilted slightly to the side, as if he was listening to someone standing just out of frame. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked long enough, something would come into focus behind him. After lunch, Ezra said we should hike up there ourselves. He said it like it was no big deal, but his voice was too flat. The trail started past the woodshed, which sagged sideways so far it looked ready to collapse. The second we stepped into the trees, that pressure came back. Like the air was thicker somehow, pressing in on my ears and filling my head with a low hum. Ezra kept moving like he didn't feel it. The path wasn't much more than flattened grass and a few scuffed footprints. The higher we climbed, the worse the pressure got. My vision blurred a little around the edges, and I had to keep swallowing to clear my ears. When we reached the ridge, the ground dropped away fast. You could see the whole valley, the dark slope of trees rolling on forever. Ezra pointed partway down the hillside. There, I followed his finger and saw it. A lopsided structure made of scrap wood nailed together in the shape of a shack. A blue tarp sagged over half the roof. From that distance, I couldn't tell if it was abandoned or if someone was crouched inside watching us. "You think someone's living there?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just squinted, like he was trying to see through the trees. "I saw it before," he finally said. When I was a kid, Uncle brought me up here. He said they'd always been down there." I swallowed hard. "Who?" Ezra shook his head. "I don't know." On the way back down, the pressure finally started to fade, but the feeling in my stomach stayed knotted up tight. Like we'd walked into something we weren't supposed to see. That night, I tried to make myself believe nothing would happen. I kept telling myself the tapping had been a dream, that the ridge was just an old hunting shack, that none of it meant anything. It was past midnight when the tapping started again, only this time it was coming from the window. I froze, my breath stuck in my throat. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a branch moving in the wind. But then I saw it. A pale shape pressing against the glass. A face. Blurry, washed-out features. The mouth lined up perfectly with the lower pane. Fog bloomed in short bursts where it exhaled. I couldn't scream, couldn't even swallow. It stayed there so long I started counting in my head just to keep from losing it. When I reached 30, the head slid slowly down out of sight. I bolted into the hall, crossed to Ezra's door, and flung it open. He was already awake, sitting up with his phone in his hand. "You heard it?" I whispered. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Yeah, I heard it." He didn't say anything else. At dawn, we packed as fast as we could. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ezra moved like he was somewhere else entirely, loading boxes without a word. When I turned to look back at the trees, I saw it again. Someone was standing just beyond the first line of trunks. Too far to see their face, but tall, with arms hanging straight down. Their shoulders were crooked, tilted like they hadn't figured out how to hold themselves up. I forced myself to look away. The drive down felt endless. Every turn in the road felt like the place where that figure would step out into the open. A week later, my phone buzzed at 3 in the morning. Ezra's voice was flat, empty. "I remembered something," he said. My uncle said they don't like it when people come up to look at them. I tried to ask who he meant, but he'd already hung up. I was 26 when I agreed to help an old friend clean out his late uncle's hunting cabin. It was way out past Grayfield Ridge, in this hollow nobody ever talked about. He called me on a Thursday night, sounding like he was trying not to wake someone in the next room. He said he'd pay me if I came along, that he couldn't do it by himself. We'd known each other since high school, back when we'd hiked those ridge trails with cheap cameras. We were always looking for something strange. Animal bones, rusted traps, old bottles. He'd never once mentioned his family-owned land out there. I asked why it had to be that weekend. He said the county had finally sent a letter. If he didn't get the place cleaned up, they'd condemn it. His voice cracked when he said that, like he'd been holding onto the words too long. I didn't press him. My work had dried up anyway, and I figured it was just another messy job to help pay rent. We met at dawn behind a gas station in Carrick. It was one of those little stations that look abandoned even when the lights are on. His truck was already loaded, tarp tied over the crates, a crowbar wedged between boxes. He looked awful. His eyes were red and he hadn't bothered shaving. I almost asked if he was sick, but he was already climbing into the driver's seat. The drive out felt longer than it probably was. First the road turned to gravel. Then the gravel turned into hard dirt, full of potholes. The trees pressed in so tight the branches slapped the truck mirrors. I remember thinking the whole time that he still hadn't explained why he'd never told me about this place. He didn't say much, and I didn't either. He kept his hands locked on the wheel, like if he let go, the truck would drift into the trees and disappear. When we finally pulled up, the cabin looked worse than I expected, like it hadn't been touched in 50 years. The porch was half sunk into the dirt. All the windows were covered with boards so old they'd started to buckle. A rusty lantern hung by the door, swinging just a little, though I tried not to think about why. He killed the engine but didn't move. We sat there long enough that I wondered if he'd fall asleep with his eyes open. Then he dug around in the glove box, pulled out a key, and held it out without looking at me. His hand was shaking. I stepped up on the porch to try the lock, but the moment I turned it, the metal crumbled away. My palm came back covered in flaky rust. The latch fell to the ground with a hollow clatter, and the door swung in slow like it was waiting for us. The smell hit me immediately, like wet fur that had been left to rot, mixed with the sour stink of old leather and something sharp I couldn't name. I glanced back to see if he was coming in, but he was still standing by the truck, staring at the doorway. For a minute, I honestly thought he might get back in and drive off without saying anything. Instead, he nodded once, like he'd made some decision, and stepped inside behind me. We started hauling stuff out in silence. There was a warped dining table that took both of us to move, though it nearly fell apart in our hands. A stack of moldy magazines stuck together so bad I had to use the crowbar to separate them. Boxes of clothes that collapsed into dust when I touched them. He barely spoke except to mutter careful anytime I picked up something near the back room. Every time I looked over, he was watching that closed door, his jaw clenched tight. After a couple hours, we stopped to eat. He sat on the tailgate, shoulders drawn up, picking at the label on his water bottle. I tried to lighten things up, asked if he'd ever spent a night here when he was little. He shook his head and finally said his uncle vanished when he was 7, just disappeared one morning, walked into the trees, and never came back. His mom never talked about it. She'd just say there were reasons they stayed away. He looked like he was going to say more, but didn't. When we went back inside, he headed straight to the back room. I followed, even though my gut told me not to. The boards over that window were thicker than the rest. It was so dark it took a minute for my eyes to adjust. In the corner was a big cedar trunk, the only thing left in there. I tried to lift the lid, but it was heavier than it looked. When I finally forced it open, the hinges screeched like an animal in pain. I flinched back so fast I almost knocked over a broken chair. Inside were folded clothes, neatly stacked. On top of them, something wrapped in canvas, tied with twine. I hesitated, but I could feel him behind me, waiting. so I started peeling back the fabric. It was a small axe. The blade was crusted with something black, almost shiny. My stomach turned just looking at it. He made a sound, half a gasp, half a groan, and reached past me to pick it up. His fingers were trembling. He laid it back in the trunk like it was a baby and said, voice low, "We'll leave that for last." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. We kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. A couple of times, I heard footsteps on the porch. Soft, steady, pacing. When I stopped to listen, they went quiet. Once, I thought I heard slow breathing on the other side of the wall, right where the boards covered the window. Around 4, he said he needed to check the generator shed behind the cabin. He took the flashlight and disappeared out the door. I stood there waiting for the door to creak shut behind him, but it never did. After a few minutes, I started stacking boxes by the entrance, trying to keep busy, but the quiet was too heavy. I glanced outside and saw the sky was already going gray. I waited another minute before stepping out onto the porch. The path to the shed was barely visible under all the leaves. Halfway down, I called his name, but nothing answered me. When I reached the shed, the door hung open and the flashlight beam jerked back and forth across the floor. I leaned in, squinting to see. Inside, there was nothing but a rusted generator, a cracked plastic chair, and a few crates slumped against the walls. I picked up the flashlight. When I turned, the beam landed on the boards and I saw the word "stay" carved over and over, so deep the wood had started to split. I took a step back. Something shifted behind the crates. At first I thought it was an animal, the way it crouched low. But then it unfolded itself. Thin limbs, ribs stretching the skin too tight. It stood up taller than me, head cocked sideways. My throat closed. Before I could say a word, it spoke. Nira, the voice was too familiar. It sounded exactly like my father, like he was standing right next to me. I wanted to answer, but my mouth wouldn't work. The thing stepped forward, hands dragging along the dirt. Its face was smooth, no eyes, no mouth, but the voice still came, clear as anything. Mira, I turned and bolted. My foot hit something and I went down hard. My shoulders screamed. I didn't stop. I crawled through leaves, branches, snagging my hair, until I saw the clearing again. My friend was standing on the porch watching me. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He didn't even blink. I yelled that there was something in the shed. He turned away like he hadn't heard me and walked into the cabin. I scrambled after him, heart punching against my ribs. The inside was dark except for a line of light falling across the cedar trunk. He was gone. I tore through every room, opened closets, cabinets, anywhere a person could hide. Nothing. I backed into the front room, gripping the flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me there. I clicked it on and swung it across the boards nailed over the front window. That's when I saw the fingers, pale, jointed, curling slow over the edge of the plywood. I bolted out the door, down the steps. His truck was still running, keys swinging in the ignition like he'd only stepped away for a second. I climbed in, slammed the lock down, and sat there shaking. My breath kept coming in these ragged little bursts I couldn't control. I don't know how long I stared at that cabin, maybe an hour. Long enough for the shadows to start swallowing the clearing. Something moved behind the boards. A tall shape pressed itself up against the slats. It tilted its head, like it was deciding if it should come after me. I turned the key. The engine coughed before it caught. I reversed so fast, gravel flew up and clattered against the boards. My last look in the mirror was that shape, still watching through the cracks. I didn't ease off the gas until I hit the main highway. When I finally stopped, I called the sheriff. They sent people out there, a search team, dogs, everything. They didn't find a trace of him. No footprints in the shed. No sign anyone had been there at all. When they asked if I was sure what I'd seen, I just stared at the ground.